T.S. Eliot to his wife. To whom I owe the leaping delight that quickens my senses in our waking time, and the rhythm that governs the repose of our sleeping time, the breathing in unison of lovers who think the same thoughts without need of speech, and babble the same speech without need of meaning. To you I dedicate this book, to return as best I can, with words a little part of what you have given me. The words mean what they say, but some have a further meaning, for you and me only. And the characters in the Elder Statesman are Monica Claverton Ferry, Charles Hemington Lambert, Lord Claverton, Federico Gomez, Miss Pigot, Mrs. Chargill, Michael Claverton Ferry. Act 1's in the drawing room of Lord Claverton's London house, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Act 2 is in the terrace at Badgley Court in the morning. Act 3 is in Badgley Court in the late afternoon of the following day. Act 1, the drawing room of Lord Claverton's London house, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's voices in the hall. Charles says, "Is your father at home today?" Monica says, "You'll see him at tea." Charles says, "But if I'm not going to have you to myself, there's really no point in my staying to tea." Monica and Charles enter carrying parcels. Monica says, "But you must stay to tea. That was understood when you said you could give me the whole afternoon." Charles says, "But I couldn't say what I wanted to say to you over luncheon." Monica says, "That's your own fault. You should have taken me to some other restaurant instead of to one where the maitre d'hotel and the waiters all seem to be your intimate friends." Charles says, "It's the only place where I'm really well known and get well served. And when you're with me, it must be a perfect lunch." Monica says, "It was a perfect lunch, but I know what men are. They like to show off. That's masculine vanity. To want to have the waiters all buzzing around you, that it reminds the girl that she's not the only one who's been there with him." Charles says, "Well, tease me if you like, but a man does feel a fool if he takes you to a place where he's utterly unknown, and the waiters all appear to be avoiding his eye. And we're getting off the point," says Monica. Charles says, "You've got me off my point. I was trying to explain." Monica says, "It's simply the question of your staying to tea that you practically promised." Charles says, "You don't understand that I have a grievance. On Monday you're leaving London with your father. I arranged to be free for the whole afternoon. On the plain understanding," Monica says, "that you should stop to tea." Charles says, "When I said that I was free for the whole afternoon, that meant you were going to give me the whole afternoon. I couldn't say what I wanted to in a restaurant. And then you took me on a shopping expedition." Monica says, "If you don't like shopping with me," Charles says, "Of course I like shopping with you. But how can one talk on a shopping expedition, except to guess what you wanted to buy and advise you to buy it?" Monica says, "But why not stop to tea?" Charles says, "Very well then. I will stop to tea. But you know I won't get a chance to talk to you. You know that, now that your father's retired. He's at home every day. And you're leaving London. And because your father simply can't bear it, that any man but he should have you to himself. Before I've said 2 words, he'll come ambling in." Monica says, "You said a good deal more than 2 words already, and because my father doesn't amble. You're not at all respectful." Charles says. I try to be respectful. But you know that I shan't have a minute alone with you. Monica says, you've already had several minutes alone with me, which you've wasted in wrangling. But seriously, Charles, Father's sure to be buried in the library, and he won't think of leaving it until he's called for tea. So why not talk now, though I know very well what it is you want to say. I've heard it all before, Charles says, and you'll hear it again. You think I'm going to tell you once more that I'm in love with you. Well, you're right. But I have something else to say that I haven't said before. That will give you a shock. I believe you love me. Monica says, oh, what a dominating man you are. Really, you must imagine you're a hypnotist. Well, being in love is more than a feeling, but Charles says, is this a time to torment me? But I'm selfish in saying that, because I think you're tormenting yourself as well. Monica says, you're right, I am, because I am in love with you. Charles says, so I was right. The moment I'd said it, I was badly frightened, for I didn't know you loved me. I merely wanted to believe it. And I've made you say so. But now that you've said so, you must say it again. For I need so much assurance. And you're sure you're not mistaken? Monica says, how did this come, Charles? It crept so softly, on silent feet, and stood behind my back, quietly, a long time. Before I felt its presence, Charles says. Your words seem to come from very far away, yet very near. You are changing me, and I'm changing you. Monica says, already? How much of me is you? Charles says, and how much of me is you? I'm not the same person as a moment ago. And what do the words mean now, I and you? Monica says, in our private world? Now, we have our private world. The meanings are different. Look, we're back in the room that we entered only a few minutes ago. Here's an armchair. There's the table. There's the door, and I hear someone coming. It's Lambert with the tea. Lambert enters with the trolley. And I shall say, Lambert, please let his lordship know that tea is waiting. Lambert says, yes, Miss Monica. Monica says, I'm very glad, Charles, that you can stay to tea. Lambert exits. Monica continues, now we're in the public world, Charles says, and your father will come with his calm, possessive air, and his kindly welcome, which is always a reminder that I mustn't stay too long, for you belong to him. He seems so placidly to take it for granted that you don't really care for any company but his. Monica says, you're not to assume that anything I've said to you has given you the right to criticize my father. In the first place, you don't understand him. In the second place, we're not engaged yet. Charles says, aren't we? We're agreed that we're in love with each other. And there being no legal impediment, isn't that enough to constitute an engagement? Aren't you sure that you want to marry me? Monica says, yes, Charles, I'm sure that I want to marry you, when I'm free to do so. But by that time you may have changed your mind. Such things happen. Charles says, that won't happen to me. There's a knock, and Lambert enters and says, excuse me, Miss Monica. His lordship said to tell you not to wait tea for him. Monica says, thank you, Lambert. Lambert says, he's busy at the moment, but he won't be very long, and exits. Charles says, don't you understand that you're torturing me? How long will you be imprisoned alone with your father in that very expensive hotel for convalescence to which you're taking him? And what after that? Monica says, there are several good reasons why I should go with him. Charles says, better reasons than for marrying me? What reasons? Monica says, first his terror of being alone, and the life he's led. He's never had to be alone, and when he's been at home in the evening, even when he's reading or busy with the papers, he needs to have somebody else in the room with him, reading too or just sitting, someone not occupied with anything that can't be interrupted, someone to make a remark to now and then, and mostly it's been me. Charles says, I know it's been you. It's a pity that you haven't had brothers or sisters to share the burden. Sisters, I should say, for your brothers never been of any use to you, Monica says, and never will be of any use to anybody. I'm afraid poor Michael. Mother spoilt him, and father was too severe. So they're always at loggerheads, Charles says. But you spoke of several reasons for your going with your father. Is there any better reason than his fear of solitude? Monica says the second reason is exactly the opposite. It's his fear of being exposed to strangers. Charles says, but he's most alive when he's among people, managing, maneuvering, cajoling, or bullying. At all of which he's a master. Strangers? Monica says, you don't understand. It's one thing meeting people when you're in authority, with authority's costume, when the man that people see when they meet you is not the private man, but the public personages. In politics, father wore a public label, and later as a chairman of public companies. Always his privacy has been preserved. Charles says his privacy has been so well preserved that I've sometimes wondered whether there was any private self to preserve. Monica says, there is a private self, Charles. I'm sure of that. Well, some people don't know themselves beyond the stuffed suit, but Charles says, you've given two reasons. One, the contradiction of the other. Can there be a third? Monica says, the third reason is this. I've only just been given it by Dr. Selby. Father is much iller than he is aware of. It may be he will never return from Badgley Court, but Selby wants him to have every encouragement. If he's hopeful, he's likely to live a little longer. That's why Selby chose the palace, a convalescent home, with the atmosphere of an hotel. Nothing about it to suggest a clinic. Everything about it to suggest recovery, Charles says. This is your best reason, and the most depressing, for the situation may persist for a long time, and you'll go on postponing and postponing our marriage. Monica says, I'm afraid, not a very long time, Charles. It's almost certain that the winter in Jamaica will never take place. Make the reservations. Selby said, as if you were going, but Badgley Court, so near your constituency, you can come down at weekends, even when the house is sitting, and you can take me out, if father can spare me, but he'll simply love having you to talk to. Charles says, I know he's used to seeing me about. Monica says, I've seen him looking at you. He was thinking of himself when he was your age, when he started like you, with the same hopes, the same ambitions, and of his disappointments. Charles says, is that wistfulness, compassion, or envy? Monica says, envy is everywhere. Who is without envy? And most people are unaware or unashamed of being envious. It is all we can ask if compassion and wistfulness and tenderness, Charles, are mixed with envy. I do believe that he is fond of you, so you must come often. And oh, Charles, dear, and Lord Cleverton enters. Monica says, you've been very long in coming, father. What have you been doing? Lord Cleverton says, good afternoon, Charles. You might have guessed, Monica, what I've been doing. Don't you recognize this book? Monica says, it's your engagement book. Lord Cleverton says, yes. I've been brooding it over. Monica says, but what a time for your engagement book. I know what the doctor said, complete relaxation, and to think about nothing. Well, you can't think about nothing. That's when things get worse, and who knows what's going to creep up if that happens. Nothing I know. That won't be easy. Lord Cleverton says, that is just what I was doing. Monica says, thinking of nothing. Lord Cleverton, contemplating nothingness. Just remember, every day, year after year, over my breakfast, I have looked at this book, or one just like it. You know, I keep the old ones on a shelf together. I could look in the right book and find out what I was doing 20 years ago today, at this hour of the afternoon. If I've been looking at this engagement book today, not over breakfast, but before tea, it's the empty pages I've been fingering. The first empty pages since I entered Parliament. I used to jot down notes of what I used to say to people. Now I've no more to say, and no one to say it to. I've been wondering how many more empty pages. Well, always think out one's deeds, but an important thing is one should have reasons not to be married. Sometimes that takes more reasons than the other. But it's not just two people getting married.